Some men become legends not because of what they did, but because of what others believed they could do. In the cotton fields of Georgia, there lived a man who moved through locked doors as if they were made of air. He walked past armed guards as if invisible. He entered the most secure homes in the county, and not a single plantation owner dared to stop him. This was not magic. This was not folklore. This was something far more disturbing. A power born from fear itself, from secrets too dark to speak aloud, and from a truth that would destroy everyone who tried to reveal it. His name was Thomas. By the time you understand why no one stopped him, you will realize that some prisons have no bars, and some chains cannot be broken even by freedom itself. The first time anyone noticed Thomas's unusual freedom was on a humid August night in 1857, when Mrs. Elizabeth Hartley woke to the sound of her bedroom door closing. Not opening, closing. She lay in the darkness, her heart hammering against her ribs, trying to convince herself she had imagined it. The house settled and creaked in the summer heat. Old wood did that. There was nothing unusual about a door moving slightly in the night, except she knew with the certainty that comes from true terror that someone was in her room. Her husband, plantation owner Richard Hartley, was away on business in Savannah, a trip planned for weeks. The house was locked, every door bolted before the household retired. 3 overseers patrolled the grounds with rifles and dogs trained since puppyhood to tear apart any slave found outside the quarters after dark. The animals had cost Richard $200 each, imported from a breeder in Virginia who specialized in plantation security. Elizabeth's eyes adjusted to the darkness now. The curtains were drawn, but thin moonlight seeped through the edges, casting the room in shades of black and gray. At the foot of her bed stood a shadow in the shape of a man, perfectly still, perfectly silent, just standing there, watching her. Elizabeth's scream caught in her throat, trapped behind terror. Her hand moved slowly toward the bell pull beside her bed, the one that would summon the household, bring men with guns running. Her fingers were inches from the silk cord when the shadow spoke. "No need for that, ma'am." The voice was quiet, respectful even. A man's voice, deep and measured. Somehow that made it worse. The politeness, the lack of threat in the tone, as if standing in a white woman's bedroom in the middle of the night was the most natural thing in the world. "Who?" Elizabeth's voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Who are you? What do you want?" "My name is Thomas, ma'am. I work your husband's fields. I've come to deliver something." The shadow moved, and Elizabeth flinched, but he was only reaching into his coat. A coat, she noticed now with growing confusion, that looked far too fine for a field hand. He withdrew something small and placed it carefully on her dresser. "Mr. Hartley left this in town," Thomas said, "at the Parker Hotel, in a room he rented under a different name. Thought you might want to see it before he returns from Savannah." Elizabeth stared at the dark shape on her dresser. A book or journal. "How did you—" She started, but Thomas was already moving toward the door. "Wait, how did you get in here? The doors are locked. The windows were latched." "Yes, ma'am, I know." "Then how—" "Sometimes doors open for people who know where the keys are kept." His hand was on the doorknob now. "And sometimes people who should keep doors locked forget that their servants know more than they let on." He opened the door. The hinges made no sound. Someone had oiled them recently. Thomas stepped into the hallway, then paused and looked back. "I'd read that journal before Mr. Hartley comes home, ma'am. All of it, every page. You'll want to know what kind of man you're married to." Then he was gone. Elizabeth heard his footsteps descending the main staircase, not the servants' stairs in the back, but the grand staircase reserved for family and guests. Heard the front door open with a soft click, heard it close again. She sat frozen in bed for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then, moving like a woman in a dream, she rose and walked to the dresser. The journal was leather-bound, expensive. She carried it to the window, pulled back the curtain to let in more moonlight, and opened to the first page. Richard's handwriting, she would recognize it anywhere, the careful, precise script he used for important business documents.
The first entry, dated March 1845, 12 years ago, met with J.H. and F.B. today regarding the Georgia coastal venture. Initial investment required $15,000 per partner. Expected return 400% within 3 years. The risk is considerable, but the alternative is bankruptcy. We agreed to move forward. God forgive us for what we're about to do. Elizabeth turned the page. More entries, each one more detailed than the last. Descriptions of investments, partnerships, ventures Richard had never mentioned to her. Names she recognized: Joshua Harper, Franklin Bradford, William Patterson, Judge Marcus Kent, the most powerful men in the county, all involved in something called the Georgia Coastal Venture. She kept reading. The entries became more explicit. References to cargo shipments, mentions of a Captain Williams who operated a vessel called the Nightingale, detailed accounts of payments made to customs officials, harbor masters, sheriffs in 3 different counties. Then, on a page dated July 1845, the truth became horrifyingly clear. The Nightingale arrived last night at the inlet north of Brunswick. Captain Williams reports 247 souls aboard, 31 lost during the crossing. The survivors are in poor condition, but should recover enough to be presentable within a fortnight. Harper has already arranged buyers in Charleston and New Orleans. We should clear $80,000 after expenses. The venture proceeds as planned. Elizabeth's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the journal. She read the entry again, hoping she had misunderstood, but there was no misunderstanding possible. Her husband, her respectable, church-going, community pillar husband, had been involved in smuggling slaves directly from Africa, not buying through legal markets, but smuggling them, importing human beings in violation of federal law, international treaties, everything their society claimed to stand for, however hypocritically. The act had been illegal since 1808. The punishment was death by hanging. She turned page after page, reading through the night. The operation continued for 3 years, from 1845 to 1848. Multiple ships, thousands of people smuggled and sold, millions of dollars in profit divided among the conspirators. The journal included everything: names of ship captains, dates of arrivals, numbers of people transported and sold, officials bribed and how much received, false documentation created, slave markets where smuggled people were sold, even assumed names under which conspirators conducted business. The last entry, dated November 1848. The venture concludes today. We've agreed to cease operations. The risks have become too great. Federal authorities are investigating smuggling along the Georgia coast. Harper believes we should destroy all records. I disagree. The documentation proves our accounting is correct and protects each partner from false claims by the others. I'll keep this journal secure. No one will find it who shouldn't. Elizabeth closed the journal as dawn began to break. She sat by the window, watching pink light spread across the fields, where slaves, some of whom might have been smuggled here, were already emerging from quarters to begin another day of forced labor. The question that terrified her most wasn't what Richard had done. It was how Thomas, a slave, had gotten his hands on this journal, and why he chose to give it to her. When the household stirred, Elizabeth rang for her maid and asked the doors be checked. Every door remained locked from inside, exactly as secured the night before. Windows latched. Night watchmen reported nothing unusual. Dogs barked briefly around midnight, but settled quickly. No possible way anyone entered the house. Yet Thomas had been in her bedroom, stood at the foot of her bed, spoken to her, placed the journal on her dresser, walked out the front door through locked doors, past guards and dogs like he owned the place. Richard collapsed into his chair. Dear God! I read it, all of it. Elizabeth's voice steady despite fury and fear inside her. Every page, the ships, the people, the bribes, everything you did. Richard, don't. She held up a hand. Don't insult me with excuses or justifications. I don't want to hear about financial troubles or desperate measures. You smuggled human beings, Richard. You broke federal law. You can hang for this. I know. He buried his face in his hands. Then explain how a slave has this journal, how he got into our house, and why you haven't had him killed to protect yourself." Richard looked up. For the first time in their 15-year marriage, Elizabeth saw genuine fear in his eyes. "I can't kill him. None of us can. He has copies. Multiple copies, hidden God knows where. If anything happens to him, if he disappears, if he dies, even if he's sold away, those copies go to federal authorities, to northern newspapers, to the British government, which has ships patrolling for smugglers and treaties allowing them to prosecute American citizens." Elizabeth sank into a chair across from him. "How many people know about this? The conspirators, maybe 15 men total. And Thomas. Who is Thomas? Why was he keeping records for you?" Richard reached for his brandy glass with shaking hands. The operation was complex. Multiple ships, multiple buyers, dozens of transactions. We needed someone to maintain accurate books. Who owed what? Who received what? How profits should be divided. We couldn't trust each other and couldn't hire a white bookkeeper without risking exposure. So you used an educated slave. Thomas came over on the second voyage, 1845. He could read and write, learned in Africa before capture, most unusual. Harper thought we should keep him, use him. He was intelligent, detail-oriented, perfect for the work. And it never occurred to any of you that giving an enslaved man detailed records of your crimes might backfire? Richard's laugh was bitter. Of course it occurred to us, but we needed him, and we thought we could control him. We thought keeping him enslaved, keeping him dependent would be enough. But he made copies. We didn't know until 1848, after we ended the operation. That's when Thomas sent each of us a message, a single page delivered to our homes. It contained exact details only he could know, and made clear if anything happened to him, everything would become public. So, for 9 years, you've been held hostage by your own slave. Yes. And he can come and go as he pleases? Not exactly. He still works the fields, still lives in the quarters, but 3 times a week he visits each conspirator, walks right up to the main house, comes inside, stays 15 minutes, then leaves. What does he do during these visits? Richard's jaw tightened. Nothing. He just exists there, stands in our homes, reminds us he can, that he has power over us. It's a psychological demonstration of control. And you all just let him? What choice do we have? If we stop him, if we show weakness or fear, he might interpret it as a threat. If we treat him harshly, he might decide revenge is worth his life. So we maintain this bizarre dance. He walks through our doors, we pretend it's normal, and we all live with this sword hanging over our heads."
Elizabeth stood and walked to the window, looking out at darkened fields. "There's something you're not telling me. Something worse than what's in the journal." Richard was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, "The numbers in that journal aren't complete." "What do you mean?" "The official records show 643 people smuggled over 3 years, but actual number was higher, much higher." "How much higher?" "I don't know. Only Thomas knows. He kept 2 sets of books, one for us to divide profits, and one that recorded the truth. The real numbers, including those who died during transport, the ones sold under false names, the children separated from mothers, the complete accounting of everything we did." Elizabeth felt sick. "And those records are what he's holding over you?" "Yes, because they don't just prove smuggling. They prove murder, fraud, conspiracy. They name every official bribed, every law broken, every lie told. If those records become public, it won't just be hanging. It'll be destruction of this entire county's leadership. Judges, sheriffs, politicians, plantation owners, everyone who profited or looked away." "Good," Elizabeth said coldly. "You all deserve it, perhaps." Richard's voice hollow. "But consider what that means for you, for Sarah. Do you want to be known as wife of a hanged smuggler? Do you want Sarah to grow up with that shame?" Elizabeth closed her eyes. She'd been so focused on moral horror she hadn't fully considered practical consequences for her own life. "What do we do?" she finally asked. "We do nothing. We live with it. We wait and hope Thomas never decides to use what he knows. And we pray no one else discovers the truth before we're all dead and beyond punishment." "That's your plan? Just wait and hope? Do you have a better one?" Elizabeth didn't answer, because she didn't. Outside, in darkness beyond the window, she thought she saw movement near the tree line. A figure, maybe, or shadows playing tricks in moonlight. But she knew somehow Thomas was out there, watching, waiting, always present even when invisible. And she understood, finally, why her husband looked so haunted, why all wealthy men in the county moved through days with shoulders slightly hunched, as if bearing weight no one else could see. They were prisoners of their own crimes, and the man who held key to their cell was someone they tried to treat as property. The irony would have been beautiful if it wasn't so terrifying. While white families lived in fear of what Thomas might do, Thomas himself lived in different kind of fear, one no amount of power over former masters could eliminate. He worked Patterson Plantation, owned by William Patterson, a man whose cruelty was legendary even in region known for harsh treatment. Patterson believed discipline was foundation of profitable agriculture, and his definition involved regular whippings, reduced rations for minor infractions, deliberate humiliation designed to break spirits. Thomas worked those fields dawn until dusk, hands bleeding, back aching from bending over cotton plants stretching to horizon. He lived in a cabin that leaked when it rained, offered little protection from winter cold, ate the same inadequate food as every other slave, cornmeal, occasional salt pork, whatever vegetables grown in small plots behind the quarters. In every visible way, he was no different from hundreds of other enslaved people in the county. But 3 times a week, after sunset, when other slaves locked in quarters, Thomas would wash face, put on a coat kept hidden under bed, fine coat Ruth had stolen from Patterson's closet years ago, and walk to the main house. He never hurried, never looked nervous, walked as if had every right to be there, as if path from quarters to the big house was his. Overseers saw him, everyone saw him, but no one said word. First time happened 6 months after Thomas sent messages to conspirators. Overseer named Dutch tried to stop him. "Where you think you're going, boy?" Dutch stepped into path, rifle raised. Thomas stopped, looked at him calmly. "Mr. Patterson is expecting me." "Like hell he is. Get back to quarters before I—" "Before you what?" Thomas' voice quiet but firm. "Before you shoot me? Go ahead. Pull trigger. See what happens next." Something in Thomas's eyes stopped Dutch. Not fear. Thomas showed no fear at all, but certainty, absolute confidence of man who knew exactly how far his power extended. Dutch lowered rifle. "I'll need to check with Mr. Patterson." "Of course. I'll wait." Dutch ran to house, burst into Patterson's study. "Sir, that slave Thomas walking up to house like he owns place. Should I—" Patterson gone pale. "Let him through." "But sir—" "Let him through." Patterson's voice sharp with panic. "Don't touch him, don't threaten him, don't even look at him wrong. Do you understand me?" Dutch returned, confused, frustrated, waved Thomas past. That was 5 years ago. Now no one even pretended to stop him. Thomas climbed the steps of Patterson Mansion, opened the front door without knocking, walked through the foyer, past parlor where Patterson's wife sat with needlework, past dining room where Patterson's children finishing dinner. No one looked at him, no one spoke, as if invisible, or acknowledging presence would make the situation more real. He found William Patterson in the study, as always, hunched over desk with whiskey glass in hand. Thomas stood in the doorway, exactly 60 seconds, counted silently in head. Patterson didn't look up, but hand shook as he lifted glass to lips. When 60 seconds passed, Thomas turned, walked out the same way he'd come. The entire visit took less than 5 minutes, spoke no words, made no threats, did nothing except exist in a space where he shouldn't be able to exist, and that was enough. Because Patterson knew, they all knew, Thomas could do so much more, could deliver copies to the authorities, could stand in courtroom, testify to everything witnessed, could write letters to newspapers, politicians, anyone who would listen. Visits were reminders, gentle, silent reminders. The power dynamic shifted in ways couldn't be changed.
Thomas walked back to quarters in darkness. As approached, saw Ruth sitting on steps of her cabin smoking pipe made from corncob. Ruth was 70 of a day, brought to America as child back when slave trade still legal. Survived owners, overseers, separations from children, every other horror slavery inflicted. Somehow maintained a core of humanity nothing could break. "Evening, Thomas," she said as he passed. "Evening, Ruth. You have your walk tonight?" "I did."
Patterson still shaking like leaf when you come in?" Thomas allowed a small smile. "He is." Ruth took a long draw on pipe. "You know they're going to try to kill you eventually. Fear only works so long before it turns to desperation." "I know. And you know when they do, they'll make it look like accident, or like another slave did it. They'll be clever about it." "I know that too." "Then why you keep walking into their houses? Why not just let them live in fear without reminder?" Thomas sat down on steps beside her. This only place he felt safe enough to show vulnerability, let mask slip slightly. "Because," he said quietly, "fear fades, memory softens. People convince themselves threats aren't real, consequences won't come. If I stop visits within a year, they'll convince themselves I don't really have power I claim. They'll start thinking ways to test me. Better remind them regularly." "That's practical answer," Ruth said. "What's real one?" Thomas' silent moment. "Real one is those walks are only freedom I have. Only moments where I'm not property, not controlled, not subject to their whims. When I walk through Patterson's front door, those 5 minutes, I'm not slave. I'm a man with power, and I need those minutes to remember what that feels like." Ruth nodded slowly. "Freedom in cage is still cage." "I know. You could run, go north, use records to buy protection from abolitionists, and abandon everyone else here. Use knowledge only for myself while hundreds remain enslaved. You don't owe them anything, Thomas. Survival isn't selfish." "Maybe not. But I've spent 12 years keeping those records safe, maintaining that power. If I run, it was all for nothing. If I stay, maybe I can find a way to use what I know to do more than just protect myself. Or maybe you'll just get yourself killed, and then everyone suffers." Thomas stood. "Maybe, but at least I'll have died as a man, not property." Ruth shook head. "You're fool, Thomas. Brave fool, but fool nonetheless, probably." He went into his cabin, small, drafty space, only private refuge, pulled up loose floorboard where Thomas kept most precious possessions, pencil nearly worn to a nub, paper stolen sheet by sheet from Patterson's study over years, small journal where Thomas kept own records, not copies threatening conspirators. These hidden locations even he visited twice a year, this different, this personal. Thomas wrote the date, August 17th, 1857. Then wrote, "Mrs. Hartley received journal. She knows now. Rishig will have told her everything by now. Another family aware of truth. Another weight added to the burden they carry." He paused, then added, "Ruth says I should run. She's probably right. But running means admitting nothing changed, that power still belongs only to those born white, free. I won't give them that victory, not yet." Thomas hid the journal again, lay down on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling. Sleep came slowly, as always, mind too full of calculations, risks, delicate balance maintained every day. He was the most powerful slave in Georgia, and also most vulnerable, because the moment protection failed, the moment records discovered or utility ended, he would be dead before sunset. Living with that knowledge, its own form of torture, one no white person in county could truly understand. By 1859, Thomas's situation normalized so much, the younger generation, children grown up seeing him walk through homes, barely questioned it. Sarah Hartley, 17 that summer, caught between childhood and adulthood, between innocence and harsh realities world born into. She'd known about Thomas her entire conscious life. Strange slave who came to house regularly, who father spoke of only in worried whispers, who seemed to move through society according to rules no one else followed. But she'd never truly paid attention until night she saw something that changed her understanding of everything. Late July, oppressively hot. Sarah couldn't sleep, gone to the kitchen for water. House dark, everyone supposedly asleep. She padding through the hallway in nightgown when heard voices from her father's study. One voice father's, another unfamiliar but somehow commanding. Sarah knew she shouldn't eavesdrop, but curiosity overwhelmed propriety. Moved silently to the study door, stood slightly ajar, listened. "Can't continue like this forever," her father sang. "You know that, I know that." The other voice, Thomas, though Sarah didn't know yet, calm, measured. "But forever's long time. I'm only concerned with today. War coming, might free me, might kill me, might change nothing. I can't plan for variables I can't control. Mr. Hartley, if the Union wins, if they free slaves, you won't need protection anymore. You could simply walk away. And if the Confederacy wins, if slavery continues another 50 years, then my protection becomes even more valuable." Sarah heard father sigh.
What do you want, Thomas? Really want, if you could have anything? Long pause. Sarah pressed closer, desperate to hear an answer. I want to live long enough to see every man who smuggled human beings held accountable for their crimes. I want to see justice, real justice, not twisted version we pretend in courtrooms where some people tout as property. I want my daughter grow up free. Sarah's breath caught. Daughter? Thomas had a daughter. You have a child? Her father sounded shocked. Born last month. Her mother, Lily, from Bradford Plantation. Bradford doesn't know yet. And before you ask, no, I won't tell you where Lily's hiding her. I learned from your example importance of information security. Thomas, that child will grow up in a different world than I did, Mr. Hartley. I'll make certain of it. Whether through laws changing or through the evidence I've kept, one way or another, she'll be free. That's what I want. I hope you get it, Richard said quietly. I genuinely do. What we did, what I did, it haunts me every single day. Good, Thomas said, no sympathy in voice. It should haunt you. You should never have a moment peace or rest the rest of your life. Footsteps approached the door. Sarah fled silently back to room, heart pounding. Thomas had a daughter. Thomas spoke to her father as equal, no more than equal, as superior, and her father, one wealthiest, most powerful man in the county, accepted it. Sarah lay in bed processing what heard. Pieces of the puzzle she'd never known existed starting to come together, the picture disturbing.
Over following weeks, Sarah began paying closer attention, noticed how prominent men of county carried themselves, slight hunch to shoulders, eyes darting around rooms as if looking for threats. Whispered conversations stopped abruptly when others approached. Noticed how Thomas moved through public spaces. Saw him once in town, walking past courthouse. Group white men stepped aside, let him pass, then watched with mingled hatred, fear. Saw Judge Kent nearly drop walking stick when Thomas appeared same street corner. Saw Franklin Bradford cross opposite side of the road rather than pass close where Thomas stood. These men wielded enormous power, decided fate's hundreds enslaved people with casual indifference, were afraid of a single slave. Sarah needed to understand why. Started spending time in father's study when away, carefully reading papers, correspondence. Found nothing explicit, but traces, references to Georgia matter, coastal situation, letters from attorneys discussing statute of limitations for federal crimes. A note from Judge Kent read simply, "We maintain our position. No changes can be made." Then one day, searching a trunk in the attic, ostensibly looking old quilts but really exploring, found metal lockbox hidden beneath layers of fabric. Lock was good, but Sarah had watched her father open similar locks before. Knew where he kept keys, small leather case in a desk drawer labeled important household keys. Took 3 tries find the right key. When opened, lockbox found a single item inside, leather-bound journal. Sarah carried it to the window where light was better and began read. Read 3 hours straight, barely breathing. Full scope father's crimes became clear. Smuggling operation. Thousands of human beings stolen from homes in Africa, packed into ships, hundreds died crossing, sold like livestock in American markets. Conspirators planned it all. Officials paid to look away, falsified documents, calculated cruelty of fall. Through it all mentioned repeatedly Thomas, record keeper, the one who documented everything. Thomas maintains meticulous accounts, one entry read. His attention to detail extraordinary. He records not just numbers, but names, ages, family groups. Harper worries this is too much information, but I believe his thoroughness protects us. If questions arise, we can prove exactly what happened. Another entry, Thomas asked today if his work would earn him freedom. Harper laughed at him. I did not. Something in Thomas's eyes. Intelligence. Calculation. I worry we've made mistake teaching him so much about operation. Later, Venture concludes today, Thomas handed final accounting. Harper wanted to kill him immediately, eliminate witness. I argued against it. Thomas too valuable, knows too much. Better keep close, controlled. Patterson agreed. We voted maintain enslavement, but with certain allowances. The journal ended there, but Sarah understood now. They'd tried control Thomas, keeping enslaved, but Thomas turned tables, keeping copies records. Now the conspirators were the ones controlled, trapped by their own crimes. Brilliant. Terrifying, but brilliant. Sarah carefully returned journal to the lockbox, locked it, replaced it exactly as found, then sat in dusty attic, knees pulled to chest, trying to process what she'd learned.
Father was a criminal, not just slave owner, legal even if Sarah's growing doubts morality, but actual criminal, violated federal law ways that carried the death penalty. And Thomas, the man she'd seen walking silently through house since childhood, was the only thing standing between Father and the noose. How was she supposed to live with the knowledge? That evening at dinner, Sarah watched her father with new eyes. He looked older than she'd realized, lines around his eyes deeper, hands less steady. Mother picked at food, barely eating, conversations stilted and uncomfortable. They all knew the whole family was living a terrible secret, pretending everything normal. "Papa," Sarah said suddenly, "do you ever regret business decisions, the ventures you invested years ago?" Silence fell over the table, absolute. Father's fork stopped halfway to mouth. Mother went pale. "What brought this on?" Richard finally asked. "I've been thinking about future, about kind of man I might marry. I'd want someone honorable, someone made ethical choices even when difficult, someone could sleep peacefully at night." Words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading outward. "We all make choices," Richard said carefully. "Sometimes circumstances force decisions we'd rather not make. The world isn't simple as the novels you read, Sarah." "I know it's not simple, but surely the difference between difficult choices and wrong choices." Sarah's mother intervened, "this isn't appropriate dinner conversation. We live in a county where people own other people, where we benefit from labor of enslaved human beings. We shouldn't talk morality like that. You're too young to understand the complexities." "I'm 17, old enough to understand right-wrong." Richard set his fork down. "What exactly are you asking, Sarah?" She met his eyes. "Asking if you sleep peacefully at night, Papa. Asking if things from the past haunt you. Asking if you believe accountability for sins." Father stared a long moment, then quietly, "No, I don't sleep peacefully. Yes, I believe accountability. I live with every single day." Sarah nodded. "Good. You should." She excused herself at the table, leaving her parents' stunned silence. That night, lying in bed, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't undo Father's crimes, couldn't free the slaves she'd smuggled, couldn't reverse time to prevent any of it, but she could choose not to be complicit in silence, could choose to acknowledge the truth, even if only to herself. Someday, if opportunity arose, she could choose to stand on the side of justice rather than comfort. Wasn't much, but something. The conspiracy Thomas created extended far beyond a handful of plantation owners directly participated in smuggling. By 1860, dozens additional people were entangled in a web of secrets and lies. Sheriff Coleman knew, accepted bribes to look away when slave ships arrived in hidden inlets, falsified reports, intimidated witnesses, used his position to protect conspirators. Dr. Samuel Pritchard knew, examined newly arrived Africans treating diseases acquired crossing, certifying them as born in America for sale in documents. His medical reputation lent credibility to false documentation. Mayor Harrison knew, used his political connections to prevent federal investigators looking closely at Georgia coastal activities. Even Reverend Matthews, a respected minister who preached Sunday mornings, Christian morality, knew something. Accepted donations for the church from the conspirators, donations so large he must have questioned their source. They all lived in fear not just of legal consequences, but social destruction. Because in antebellum society, reputation was everything. A man could survive financial ruin and rebuild, but a man whose reputation was destroyed, publicly revealed as a criminal smuggler or a person who had violated the law and decency, was a man finished. His family would be shunned. Children would never find respectable marriages. His name would become a curse. Thomas's power wasn't just he could send men to the gallows, it was that he could destroy families, legacies, the social fabric of the entire county. One afternoon in June 1860, several conspirators gathered secretly at Bradford Estate to discuss the situation. The meeting arranged carefully, servants dismissed, guests arriving separately to avoid suspicion, doors locked, windows covered. Franklin Bradford poured whiskey for the assembled group. Richard Hartley, William Patterson, Judge Kent, Sheriff Coleman, Dr. Samuel Pritchard, 3 other plantation owners who were invested in smuggling. "Gentlemen," Bradford began, "we've lived under Thomas's thumb 12 years. Think it's time seriously discuss options." "We've had this conversation a dozen times," Judge Kent said wearily. "Haven't found a solution yet because we're too cautious, too afraid to be decisive." "Decisive action?" Patterson's voice sharp. "You mean murder, so? Say it plainly, Franklin." "Fine, yes, I mean eliminating the threat." And the copies of records, Richard asked, the ones delivered to the authorities if anything happens to Thomas. We don't know for certain those copies exist, Bradford argued. Maybe a bluff. Maybe he only has one set, and he's simply convinced us not to bluff. Dr. Pritchard spoke the first time. 3 years ago, my son, drunk and foolish, tried to attack Thomas. He wanted to teach the uppity Negro a lesson. Before the boy could land a blow, Thomas stopped him with a single sentence. Your father examined 73 children under 5 and certified born Virginia, sold to markets in New Orleans. That information is currently held by 3 different people who don't know each other. If I don't meet each specific dates, they'll deliver sealed packages to federal authorities. The room was silent. My son was terrified by the specificity and the fact that Thomas knew the exact numbers he'd run. He left Georgia entirely, moved to Texas. Thomas was right. I did examine 73 children. That number isn't in any documents we kept. In our records, only Thomas maintained. So the copies are real, Sheriff Coleman said heavily. Means we're trapped. Perhaps not permanently, Judge Kent said thoughtfully. Gentlemen, consider this. Thomas is 35, 36. He could live another 30, 40 years, but we won't. Most of us are already 50s, 60s. Patterson's nearly 70. Your point? The point is, time solves this problem for us. Eventually, Thomas will die. When he does, whatever instructions he left will be executed by people with no personal stake in the matter. People won't be bribed, intimidated, or reasoned with, Richard said quietly. When Thomas dies, his instructions will be carried out exactly as planned. The evidence delivered, our crimes exposed. Our children and grandchildren will be left to bear the shame. Better them than us, Bradford muttered. Richard stood up abruptly. Listen to yourselves. You're planning for Thomas's natural death, hoping your own comes first so you'll die before facing consequences. That's not a strategy. That's cowardice. Then suggest a solution, Patterson demanded. Confession? Should we all march to federal court, admit everything, hang honorably? Of course not. But we could stop making it worse, stop treating Thomas an enemy to be defeated, except we created the situation through our greed and criminality. Easy to say, Bradford shot back. Your fortune was already substantial before the venture. The rest of us needed money to survive. No one needs money badly enough to justify smuggling human beings. Don't lecture morality.
We need get her out, Lily whispered one night, hand on swollen belly. When born, need get away here. Where? How? Thomas asked. I can't leave. If disappear, everything built collapses. They'll destroy evidence, kill anyone knows anything, make sure no trace remains. Then I'll take her. I'll run. They'll hunt you. Bradford sent trackers, dogs, claims stole valuable property, both yourself and child. Then what do we do? Let grow up enslaved? Let Bradford sell away old enough work? Thomas had no answer. He was powerful in specific ways, but couldn't protect his own family. Irony, bitter. Baby was born in August 1859, a girl named Grace, though Lily couldn't officially register the name anywhere. First months of life, Grace lived in Lily Bradford's slave quarters. Thomas visited when he could. Franklin Bradford knew the child. Everyone knew, but Bradford had made a calculated decision not to interfere. Thomas's visits to the plantation were unsettling enough. Antagonizing a man threatening his daughter seemed begging disaster. An unspoken agreement existed. Bradford pretended not to notice Thomas's family. Thomas maintained his usual schedule of visits to Bradford's home. Neither acknowledged the deeper implications, but Thomas knew the arrangement couldn't last forever. When Grace was 6 months old, Thomas made a decision. Approached Bradford directly during one of his regular visits. I want to buy my daughter's freedom, Thomas said. Bradford, staring fixedly at his desk, as always during Thomas's visits, looked up in genuine surprise. You want what? I'll pay for her. For Grace. Name Christ. Slaves can't own property, can't buy anything. Then I'll provide information worth far more than one infant's market value. Information about fellow conspirators, things you've done they don't know, things that could shift the balance of power among you. Bradford's eyes narrowed. You'd betray others to save daughter? Without hesitation, but I'd prefer a simpler transaction. Set a price. Find a way pay through intermediaries. Grace becomes free. If refuse, Thomas leaned forward slightly, then I'll remember, when I had chance for one good thing, one small act of decency, you chose cruelty instead. I'll remember when I decide what records I hold. closest Thomas had ever come to an explicit threat. The balance in their strange relationship shifted in that moment. Bradford was silent for a long time. "If you free child, she'll have nowhere to go. Lily isn't free, you aren't free. Grace might be free on paper, but functionally she's still enslaved. Have options, I don't. Could sent north, placed with free black families to raise her. Could kidnapped, re-enslaved. Happens all the time, Thomas, you know that." Thomas did know. Free papers meant nothing to someone who decided to ignore them and claim her as escaped property. "I'm offering you a chance to be less of a monster than you already are," Thomas said finally. "Take it or not take it, but it will be remembered." Bradford stood, walked to his safe, pulled a blank manumission form, a legal document granting freedom to enslaved individuals. His hand shook slightly as he filled in Grace's name, approximate birth date, and status. "No payment," Bradford said. "I'll free you without cost. Not merciful, just tired. Just so goddamn tired of living like this. Fearing man I'm supposed to own, jumping in shadows. If freeing one child buys an ounce of peace, so be it." Signed the document and handed it to Thomas. "Makes her legally free. Doesn't make her safe. Understand that difference?" "I do." "Then take it. Get out of my house." Thomas took the papers, carefully folded, and placed it inside his coat. He walked to the door, paused. "Thank you," he said quietly. Bradford laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Don't thank me. I did it from weakness, not virtue. We both know it." Thomas left Bradford's estate that night, carrying the most valuable thing he had ever possessed, the proof that his daughter was not property. It wasn't safety, Bradford was right about that, but it was a chance. In a world for enslaved people where no chances existed, one chance was everything. After discovering the truth about her father, Sarah Hartley's understanding of the world cracked and reformed like ice breaking in a spring thaw. She was raised to believe in the natural order, white people superior, black people inferior. Slavery not ideal perhaps, necessary, justified, biblically supported. Plantation owners benevolent stewards of people too primitive to care for themselves. Every sermon she'd heard, every lesson from governesses, every conversation with adults in her life reinforced that narrative. But her journal showed a different picture. Showed white men, most respected in community, committing crimes so heinous even their own legal system would execute them. Showed the same men afraid of a single enslaved person because that person had intelligence, discipline, integrity they lacked. Thomas was not inferior. Thomas was extraordinary. Men who claimed superiority were moral cowards. Once Sarah saw the truth she couldn't unsee, started noticing things. The way slaves were spoken about in their presence as if they couldn't understand, had no feelings. Casual cruelty she'd witnessed her entire life and never questioned. Elaborate justifications her community had constructed to explain why owning human beings was acceptable. All lies. Comfortable lies that allowed people like her family to live in luxury built on the suffering of others. Sarah began spending time in the kitchen, speaking with the house slaves, actually speaking, asking about their lives and listening to their answers. Learned the names she'd never bothered to learn before. Heard stories of families separated, children sold, hopes destroyed. Mother noticed the change. "Sarah, you are becoming inappropriate. You have become too familiar with the servants. They have their place, we have ours." "Their place," Sarah's voice sharper than intended. "They're people, Mother. They have thoughts, feelings, families, just like us. Of course, dear, no one denies that, but the social order must be maintained. If you become too familiar, they might forget their station, or we might remember our humanity." Elizabeth stared at daughter. "Sarah, that sounds almost abolitionist. You know that's dangerous. Wouldn't tolerate it in this county either." "Yes, dangerous for you and for family." Sarah wanted to shout. Her family deserved whatever danger came for her father's crimes. It warranted punishment, fear of justice. She held her tongue. Destroying her family wouldn't help the slaves she'd already smuggled, wouldn't undo her father's crimes. Instead, started educating herself. She read everything she could, found arguments for and against slavery, the growing tensions north and south. Had to hide her reading materials, books by Frederick Douglass, Harriet Beecher Stowe, and other abolitionist writers. Their possession was effectively illegal in Georgia. Started paying close attention to Thomas. Watched him move through the house during his visits, seeing him properly for the first time. He wasn't shuffling, servile. He carried dignity, a quiet strength. His eyes intelligent, alert, missing nothing. One evening, Sarah did something incredibly foolish.
She went to the library during one of Thomas's scheduled visits and waited for him. When Thomas entered the room, he usually spent a minute in the library each visit, she'd learned. He stopped short seeing her. "Miss Hartley," he said quietly, "you shouldn't be here. My home. Why shouldn't I be in the library? You know why." Sarah stood. "I read Father's journal, one from the lockbox in the attic. I know what you're doing. Why do you think I'm afraid of you?" Thomas's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Then you know this conversation is dangerous for both of us. I know, and I don't care." She took a deep breath. "I want to help. Help how? I don't know yet. But my father did all those things, did that evil. He should be held accountable. If those records can do that, I want to help make sure they're not destroyed." Thomas studied her for a long moment. "How old are you?" 17. Young enough to still believe in simple justice. Old enough to be dangerous by acting without thinking. He moved toward the door. "Miss Hartley, the best way to help is to stay silent, stay safe, and wait. When the time comes, and it will come, Miss Hartley, anyone who sees can see that, people with conscience needed to rebuild. Be one of those people. That's not enough. I want to do something now. Wanting something and knowing what to do are two different things. You can't undo her father's crimes by exposing him. You'd destroy your mother, ruin your own future, and accomplish nothing for the people he smuggled. They're scattered across 5 states now, sold and resold. Justice for them is impossible. Then what's the point of the records you keep?" Thomas paused at the door. "Insurance, protection, maybe someday testimony, but not revenge. Never revenge. Revenge is poison." He looked back at her. "If you want to help, then when the war comes, and it will come, Miss Hartley, anyone who sees can see that, choose the right side. Use whatever privilege you have to help the people with none. That's how you make amends for the benefits you received from this evil." He left before she could respond. Sarah stood in the library shaking slightly. She had expected to feel heroic, brave. Instead, she felt small, naive, reminded her desire to help was rooted partly in wanting to absolve her own guilt. But Thomas was right in one thing. War was coming. Everyone could feel it. Tensions between the North and the South were reaching breaking points. Violence in Kansas, political crisis in Congress, debates over slavery louder and bitterer. When war came, Sarah had choices to make. She hoped she'd have the courage to make the right ones. Not everyone connected to the conspiracy was content to live in fear. Some, men particularly with less to lose, began plotting active solutions. Carl in Vicksburg, one of the overseers on Patterson's plantation, a hard man who'd made a living through violence and intimidation. He'd been hired after the smuggling ended, knew nothing specific about the crimes, but knew Thomas's unusual privileges enraged him. "Ain't natural," he complained to other overseers over whiskey. "A Negro walking around like he owns the place, coming and going as he pleases. Something needs done. Patterson allows it." Another overseer pointed out they can't go against what their boss wants. Patterson's gone soft. Thomas has something on him. Either way, it's wrong. Slaves need to remember their place, for everything falls apart. Vicksburg started watching Thomas carefully, looking for opportunities. He knew
Vicksburg's smile faltered slightly. "Answer, Thomas, continued information. Have information destroy every powerful man county. Information protected. If die, injured, disappear, becomes public. Everyone connected suffers. Got nothing, whatever dirt Holdy, no, but Patterson does. If Patterson suffers, couldn't control yourself, think he'll do you?" Vicksburg lowered whip slowly. "Bluffing. Am I? Then hit me. See happens tomorrow. See Patterson keeps you employed. See don't find run out Georgia entirely." 2 men stood facing darkness. Finally, Vicksburg stepped aside. Thomas walked past without word, but Vicksburg's rage didn't dissipate. Festered, started drinking more, complaining more, talking about something needed done about Thomas. One overseer's worried heading finally went to Patterson, whose concerns grew. Patterson called Vicksburg office next day. "Hearing you making threats against Thomas," Patterson said coldly. "Not threats, sir. Just saying everyone thinking ain't right how he—" "You leave Thomas alone. Completely alone. Not speak, not look, not acknowledge existence. If you can't do that, you're welcome to seek employment elsewhere." Vicksburg stared. "Sir, don't understand. He's not just anything. Untouchable. If you can't accept that, you have no use to me." "But why? What's he got that—" Patterson stood, face red. "Because he has power to destroy me, idiot. Evidence of crimes that would see you hanged. Made arrangements for evidence to become public if anything happens to him. So yes, he walks freely. Yes, he has privileges. Yes, we tolerate him because the alternative is death. Answer my question." Vicksburg's face went pale. "What kind crimes?" "The kind you will never speak of. Not me, not anyone. The kind that are buried, need to stay buried." Patterson sat heavily. "Your choice, Vicksburg. Accept the situation, continue working, generous pay, or leave today, never return. Choose now." Vicksburg chose to stay, but the conversation planted seeds, started asking quiet questions, speaking to overseers on other plantations, piecing together whispers and rumors. Within 6 months, he had a rough outline of the conspiracy. Smuggling, illegal importation of people, probably Africa, and began to wonder the profit might be made on his information. If Thomas's records were valuable enough to protect him, maybe they were valuable to others too. Federal authorities maybe, newspapers, even the conspirators themselves, might pay for it, might pay for records destroyed. Vicksburg didn't act on his thoughts immediately, but they simmered in his mind as a backup plan if things ever got bad enough when he needed money quickly. He wasn't the only person making these calculations. Throughout county, others learned fragments of truth, considering how that knowledge could be leveraged. Thomas's power held him now, but it rested on a foundation of fear. Fear only lasts so long before it transforms into something more dangerous: desperation. Secession of South Carolina in December 1860 sent shockwaves to Georgia. January 1861, Georgia followed. April, Fort Sumter was fired upon. America was at war itself. For the conspirators who lived under Thomas's threat for 13 years, the war represented a terrifying new variable. The old social order was fracturing. Federal authority, the authority to prosecute crimes, might soon control Georgia, or conversely, a Confederate victory might change the laws that affected the severity of crimes. More immediately, war meant chaos. Soldiers moving across the countryside, normal routines disrupted, the possibility during all the confusion Thomas might be killed, freed, and carefully constructed protection would collapse. William Patterson called an emergency meeting of the surviving conspirators in June 1861. Judge Kent had recently died of natural causes, taking his fear to the grave. The remaining men gathered Bradford's estate, exhausted, aged years by anxiety. "War changes everything," Patterson began. "If Union wins, slavery ends. Thomas becomes free. Then pray for a Confederate victory," someone said. "If the Confederacy wins, slavery continues, maybe for generations, and we continue living under Thomas's thumb for the rest of our natural lives." Patterson shook his head. "Either outcome is untenable." "Then what do you propose?" Richard Hartley asked, though he suspected the answer. "Eliminate the problem before the war reaches Georgia, while you still control him." "We've been through this," Bradford protested. "The copies." "Maybe the copies don't matter in everything chaos," Patterson interrupted. "Think of it. War provides cover. Thomas dies in confusion, killed by deserters, Union sympathizers, random violence war brings. Instructions about his copies become confused. Maybe they delivered to authorities, but authorities have bigger concerns than decade-old smuggling crimes. Maybe the record's just lost in the chaos. It's a risk, but might be our only chance." "It's murder," Richard said flatly. "Say it. Survival. Cowardice. We've committed crimes, we bear the consequences. Easy to say, your fortune is already substantial. Some of us need it." "Don't," Richard slammed his hand on table. "Don't use necessity as excuse. We're greedy. Admit it. Saw opportunity to become wealthy and took it regardless of human cost. That's the truth of Thomas, and nothing but him to remind us of that truth." "Then what would you have us do? Just wait for our own destruction? What would you have us do what we should have done 13 years ago? Confess, face consequences, at least die with a shred of dignity intact?" The room erupted in arguments. Some agreed with Richard's position in principle, but lacked courage to act on it. Others argued passionately for Patterson's approach. Few remained silent, paralyzed by indecision. The meeting ended no consensus, but a fracture had formed within the group. Patterson, Bradford, and 3 others decided they were willing to risk violence. Richard, Dr. Pritchard, and 2 others decided they'd rather live with the uncertainty than add murder to the list of their crimes. The remaining men were waiting to see which side proved stronger.
Thomas knew the meeting, knew everything that happened among the conspirators. He had people throughout the county feeding information, slaves who overheard conversations, free black workers who heard rumors, even a few white people with a conscience troubled enough to provide warnings. He knew Patterson was preparing to act. He knew time was running out. Thomas sat in a cabin one night considering his options. He could run, use the evening's freedom to disappear north, take Lily Grace possible, use records leverage, gain protection from abolitionists, federal authorities. But running meant abandoning everyone else. Other enslaved people in the county would remain in bondage. The conspirators would destroy whatever evidence they could, and Thomas's 13 years' careful work would end to nothing accomplished. Alternatively, he could strike first, deliver records to the authorities now before Patterson could act. The conspirators would hang or go to prison. Plantations would be confiscated. Justice in some form would be served. But Thomas's protection would end. The men exposed would have nothing to lose. Their families desperate to preserve something might come after him and his daughter. In Confederate Georgia, a slave who destroyed powerful white men would find no protection regardless of the legality of the evidence. So Thomas chose a third option. Disappeared. Not completely, not permanently, strategically. On a moonless night in July 1861, Thomas gathered a few possessions, took some money he'd saved from small jobs performed over the years, and walked away from Patterson Plantation. He didn't go far, a small settlement of free black families 15 miles away. The community was barely a collection of cabins in the woods, hidden from casual observation. Free blacks lived precarious lives in Georgia, constantly at risk of being kidnapped and re-enslaved, so they had developed networks and skills for staying safe. Thomas arrived at the settlement and was taken in by a woman named Naomi, whom he knew slightly from previous encounters. He explained the situation, some anyway, and asked for temporary shelter. "How long you need to stay hidden?" Naomi asked. "Don't know, months maybe, until I can see how war develops." "He is in danger?" "Yes. More importantly, my disability puts a target on others. If I disappear, it shifts the situation and makes them uncertain instead of desperate." Naomi studied him. "You're one of the people whisper about, slave who walks into white folks' doors." Thomas nodded. "Heard they keep kinder records. Protection. That's right. Records somewhere safe. 3 separate locations, 3 different people who don't know each other. Something happens, instructions get delivered." Naomi smiled slightly. "Smart. Stay, but work. No free riders here." Thomas spent the next months living in the settlement, working odd jobs, helping repairs and construction. He was stronger than most from years in field labor, and his education was valuable in keeping accounts and writing letters. He made 2 secret trips during this time. One to check on Lily Grace at Bradford Plantation, to see that both were safe, Lily hidden, Grace's manumission papers carefully stored. One to meet with one of his record-keeping accomplices to ensure the arrangements remained intact. Meanwhile, back in the county, his absence created exactly the uncertainty intended. The conspirators didn't know if he was dead, fled north or hiding. They didn't know if his protection was still in effect. They didn't know to feel relief or terror. The uncertainty turned them each against each other. Patterson was convinced Thomas had fled north, and the threat was diminished, and started pressuring the conspirators to destroy the remaining evidence. He also wanted them to agree on a shared story in case the authorities ever asking questions. But Richard Hartley refused. "If Thomas is dead or gone, we wait. Don't make things worse by creating new crimes." Fool Hartley. Our chance to do what? Destroy evidence that might not matter anymore. Thomas might have fled, yes, but his instructions remain. It changes nothing. Destroy nothing. Wait. Bradford sided with Patterson. Dr. Pritchard sided with Hartley. The group fractured into warring factions, each suspicious of the others. Then, in September 1861, something strange happened. Franklin Bradford received a letter, delivered through the normal postal channels, addressed in handwriting Bradford recognized immediately. Inside was a single page. "I neither dead nor gone. Arrangements remain in effect. Any attempts to alter the situation will be interpreted as threats and responded to accordingly. Continue as before." No signature, no return address. Bradford showed the letter to Patterson and others. The effect was immediate. The fragile hope Thomas's disappearance meant freedom collapsed. Fear returned stronger than ever, because now they didn't even know where Tom.
Following months, other letters arrived. Judge Carter, taking Judge Kent's duties, received one. Sheriff Coleman received one. Even Mayor Harrison, relatively peripheral conspiracy, received reminder of his complicity. Letters said little beyond existence. Enough. Thomas out there. Thomas watching. Thomas' protection remained active. Some conspirators found the letters reassuring. At least new situation changed. Others found it a threatening promise of future action. Patterson's health began to deteriorate. Always robust, the stress and anxiety took toll. Late 1862, developed persistent cough, lost significant weight. Bradford drank heavily. Plantation productivity decreased, paid less attention management, more to fears. Richard Hartley, meanwhile, did something unexpected. Began quietly liquidating assets, setting money aside. When Elizabeth asked what he was doing, he said preparing for consequences. If Thomas ever decides to reveal what he knows, we need resources, not lawyers. Can't fight the evidence. But I can take care of you and Sarah after I'm gone. Think he'll hang Thomas releases records? Yes, probably. Crimes are clear, but long, surely statute limitations for smuggling. Evidence is detailed. He'll hang. Family name destroyed. Trying to leave you, Sarah, something to survive on. Elizabeth touched his hand. I'm sorry what I did. Being a part of all this, benefiting as I did, not asking harder questions earlier. Richard squeezed her hand. We're all complicit. Everyone profited. Everyone stayed silent. Guilt was shared. Knowing the guilt was shared didn't make carrying easier. War reached Georgia in earnest 1864. General Sherman's march to sea cut a swath of destruction throughout the state, liberating slaves, burning plantations, dismantling infrastructure of the Confederacy. When Union forces reached county Thomas lived, they found the population in chaos. Some plantation owners fled, others stayed, trying desperately to preserve what they could. Slaves were liberated, though many had nowhere to go, with little understanding what freedom would mean practically. The conspirators who remained faced new terror. Union occupation meant Union military courts. Union courts might be interested in evidence of Confederate crimes. Richard Hartley, sitting in the study when Union soldiers arrived Plantation December 1864, he expected them. Officer in charge, Captain Morrison, young but carried authority. Richard Hartley? Yes. Here an inventory of property and assets. Everything will be recorded for potential confiscation. Understand? Morrison looked around the study, noting expensive furniture, books, evidence of wealth. You owned 43 slaves, according to records. Did. Free now. Do you have documentation for their origins, bills of sale, transfer papers? Richard's heart hammered. Some of it. Records incomplete. Incomplete how? Lost over years. Fires. Misplacement. We know it. Morrison studied him. Actually, we don't know it, Mr. Hartley. I'm from Massachusetts. We freed slaves nearly a century ago. Explain how records for significant and valuable property just disappear. Before Richard could answer, another voice spoke from the doorway. Because some slaves never supposed to exist in the first place. Richard turned. Thomas stood, looking older, healthier, wearing clothes marked a free man, a good coat, boots without holes. He carried differently, not like a slave, though the intelligence in his eyes was unchanged. Who you? Morrison asked. Thomas Freeman, working for the Freedmen's Bureau now, helping newly freed navigate rights. I was enslaved here, know the area. Freeman. Thomas had taken a surname. Richard felt something twist in his chest. The man he'd owned now had a name that signified independence. Morrison looked between them. You know something missing from the records, Mr. Freeman. You know Mr. Hartley and several men in county involved in illegal activities before the war, activities that might interest my superiors. Richard closed his eyes, the moment he dreaded for 17 years. But Thomas continued. However, I'm not sure Union military courts are appropriate venue addressing crimes. These crimes were committed against people who are not here to testify. The perpetrators are old, broken men who've already paid a high price in psychological suffering. Executing them now wouldn't bring justice to victims. It wouldn't bring anybody back. It would add more deaths to an already tragic history. Morrison frowned. So you're saying there's evidence of crimes you don't want prosecuted? I'm saying justice is complicated, Captain. Sometimes mercy serves the future better than vengeance serves the past. Thomas looked at Richard. I'm saying I've seen enough death, haven't you? Richard couldn't speak, just nodded. Morrison was frustrated, uncertain. If there's evidence of crimes, I'm obligated to report them. I'll think, Thomas said. But for now, I'm interested in helping the people just freed figure out survive. That seems more urgent than punishing men who've already destroyed.
Morrison left shortly, clearly suspicious, unsure how to proceed. When the soldiers were gone, Richard looked at Thomas. Why? Why what? Why didn't you tell them everything? It was a perfect opportunity. You could have destroyed all of us. Thomas was silent a moment. Because I realized something in the time away. Revenge doesn't free anyone. It creates new chains. I could spend the rest of my life watching you hang, testifying at trials. I could spend it building anew, helping people who actually need help. But you deserve punishment. Yes, you do. You live with guilt every day for the rest of your life. That's a harsher sentence than hanging, Mr. Hartley. Death is easy. Living with guilt is hard. Richard felt tears running down his face. I'm sorry for all of it. I know not enough, but I'm sorry. I know you are. Not sure it matters, but I know. Thomas moved toward the door. I won't be visiting your house anymore. I'm done with the performances. I'm done living in relation to you and others. I'm starting a new life on my own terms. What happens to the records? They stay hidden. As long as none of you try to restore the old system, as long as you don't interfere with freed people trying to build new lives, the records stay hidden. But if I hear of any attempting to re-enslave people through debt peonage, false charges, or any tricks, if I hear of any backsliding into old ways, everything will be public. Clear? Clear. Thomas left. Richard sat alone in the study, feeling oddly hollow. He'd spent 17 years terrified of Thomas's power. Now, the threat seemingly ended, he felt no relief, just emptiness. Because Thomas was right. The punishment was living with what he'd done, and no amount of time would make it easier. Years following the war were chaotic. Reconstruction brought new laws, new social dynamics, new possibilities, and new dangers. Freed slaves in Georgia faced poverty, violence from resentful whites, and the challenge of building lives with nothing. Thomas worked for the Freedmen's Bureau for 3 years, traveling across Georgia. He helped former slaves file legal claims, register marriages, establish schools. He used his literacy, the education the Loyalists took the risk to give him, to navigate bureaucratic systems designed to frustrate people who were never allowed to read. Lily Grace joined him in Atlanta, 1866. They lived in a small apartment, poor but free. Thomas found work bookkeeper at a black-owned business. Lily took in sewing. Grace, now 7, attended a new school for black children. For the first time in Thomas's life, he experienced something resembling normal. No fear of being sold, no charades of power, no constant vigilance, just work, family, and modest hopes for the future. But the records remained hidden. Thomas checked them twice a year, ensuring they were secure, because Reconstruction was fragile. Former Confederates were pushing back, creating new laws to restrict black freedom, forming groups that used violence and intimidation. The Ku Klux Klan, born in Tennessee, spread quickly. If progress of Reconstruction was reversed, Thomas wanted insurance. The records could still be used if necessary. In 1868, Thomas received a letter from Sarah Hartley. She'd moved to Philadelphia after the war, unable to stomach living in Georgia anymore. She'd become involved in charitable work with freed people who had migrated north. Dear Mr. Freeman, she wrote, using the chosen surname respectfully. I hope this letter finds you well. Wanted to know your father passed last month. Heart failure, the doctor said, though I think it's more accurately spirit failure. He died carrying the weight of what he'd done. I suppose it's a form of justice. I don't expect you to forgive him or any of them. I don't forgive him entirely, though I loved him. But I wanted to know his final years he used what remained of his money to quietly fund schools for freed people. It wasn't enough to balance the scales. Nothing could, but it's something. It showed that power doesn't mean cruelty. Justice sometimes looks like mercy. I'm trying to live by that example. Thank you for the unexpected lessons. Thomas kept the letter, never wrote back. Nothing to say wouldn't feel false or performative, but he was glad to know that Richard had tried in a small way to make amends. The other conspirators died one by one in following years. Patterson in 1870, bitter in the end. Bradford in 1872, his fortune mostly intact, but his political influence destroyed. Dr. Pritchard in 1873 spent his final years treating the poor blacks and whites without charge, trying to heal more than physical ailments. Sheriff Coleman fled Georgia entirely, moved to Texas where no one knew his past. By 1875, the principal conspirators were dead and scattered. The world they'd known gone. Slavery abolished. The social order they'd fought to preserve collapsed. Thomas's records became historical curiosities rather than immediate threats. Thomas moved his family to Philadelphia in 1868. Following Sarah's example, the North wasn't free, but offered opportunities unavailable in Georgia. Thomas opened a small bookshop selling new and used books, modest but profitable. Grace grew up in Philadelphia, attending good schools, never knowing the terror of slavery except from her parents' stories. She became a teacher herself, working in schools for black children. Thomas never spoke publicly of his past, never told the dramatic story that held power over powerful men. Asked about his life before Philadelphia, he said simply he survived slavery.